Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile 1 discussion. Welcome to day 17 of Teaser season for patch 3.26 and the upcoming Secrets of the Atlas expansion. Today, we've got a few things to go through and they're all scattered. It's not like this is one individual massive teaser. Instead, there's a bunch of little things that have been collected from different locations, including Granny Gear Games announcing that tomorrow they will be announcing some sort of Sanctum nerf. The details of this are not known. The severity of this is not known. However, that has certainly been a very polarizing statement, with a lot of people saying fantastic finally, and a number of people saying no, my favorite mechanic is getting gutted. Of course, we'll find out just how substantial that is at some point tomorrow. Let's start with the first announcement Granny Gear Games made today. That was the updated Atlas tree and the updated passive tree for characters. These were both revealed, but they were revealed in a fairly clunky programmer-oriented format. So they're put out as a .json file. And don't worry if you can't read that, I'll put links down in the description below to visualizers that POEDB has made. POEDB is a data mining website that has a whole bunch of information about the game, and they have put together a visualizer for both of these files. The first thing though that you'll want to notice is some of the things that were changed yesterday in the character power passive tree. They mentioned a few new clusters that were being added, like Hasty Demise, but there was no information on what these clusters were actually like. So we now know where Hasty Demise is located on the passive tree. It's reasonably close to Acrimony, so you are definitely going to Acrimony on any build that would take Hasty Demise, and so this is something that you can definitely easily get your hands on if you want it. How good is this cluster? Well, we already knew 30% increased damage over time with spell skills. Note this is increased, this is not .multi. And 8% increased cast speed, with the generally a drawback of 10% reduced skill effect duration. This is a solid node, but not a spectacular node. However, the rest of the cluster is actually pretty good. It's only 2 nodes leading up to it, and the first one is mediocre, 12% increased damage. The second one is genuinely good at 16% increased damage. All in all, this cluster is slightly better than I was expecting yesterday, but not something that is truly outstanding. We'll get to the Harsh Lessons cluster in a sec. I do have a very quick channel announcement I wanted to make first though, and that is that you've probably seen a bit of an increased push from content creators for things like Patreon recently, and I personally use YouTube's competing product to that, which is channel memberships. The reason that that's been happening is that it's noticeable that advertiser spending is down quite a bit, and ultimately we get paid by the companies that put ads on YouTube videos. With that in mind, I want to try and reduce my reliance on that. And so channel memberships are one thing that can help me do that. What I plan to do is not permanently paywall anything behind channel membership, but there'll be things that go up earlier there. And something I experimented with today was posting this video early and as yet unedited. So the first take of the video went up for channel members to view, and then after that I spent a bit of time editing it and then put out the more polished version of it later that was going to be available for everyone. When I do an early version for members, it is also ad-free. I feel like this is a far better option than the alternative, which is taking some of the awful sponsorship deals that keep filling up my inbox from various market-leading mobile games, ones that I have no intention of playing and don't really want to encourage anyone else to. Anyways, that's enough of that. Back to what you wanted to hear. The other cluster that we've got here, Harsh Lessons, is better than I was expecting, and by quite a bit. So this has a 12% .multi for spell skills. Again, all of these things are for spellcasters only. So this is spells like Cold Snap that deal damage over time. This is not going to apply to ailments. This is a pretty good cluster. Firstly, it's in a spot that you almost certainly path through on pretty much every witch build. You path very close to this, if not already through this junction here. And you're picking up 12% .multi, which is great, but you're also picking up 4% here, and then your choice of 6% or 4% here. And on top of that, if you choose to go with 4%, you get 6% skill effect duration. However, I think the answer for most people to this difficult decision that's being posed is, why not both? You're probably going to take both of these nodes because which of them is better is going to vary based upon your build, but one of them will be better than the other, but the other one will still be fine, and it'll be better than a random node on your tree. So the Harsh Lessons cluster, again, better than expected, and the Hasty Demise cluster, also better than expected. These are both pretty good things. Next, we have the changes that are being made to the Atlas passive tree. The most visually obvious change, of course, is what's happening to Tree North. At the moment, we have the Shaper and Elder cluster, and now we have the General Endgame cluster. This is primarily dedicated to the new Pinnacle bosses. Firstly, at the top, we have Remembered Kindness, Educated Upbringing, and Traumatic Experience. All of these were already spoiled. 80% reduced chance for memory threads that you find to point you towards particular Pinnacle Boss that you aren't interested in fighting. These are probably not going to be something you'll take in Trade League very often. It might turn out that one of the Pinnacle Bosses, almost no one wants the loot from it. If that ends up happening, then there'll be a bit of a push for people to allocate the relevant nodes. So if it turns out the Incarnation of Dread has terrible loot, then a lot of people will start speccing Traumatic Experience. But then it'll still be the case that some people will want that loot, and you might find that the items in question shoot up in price as a result of that. If that happens, people will start unclicking Traumatic Experience and might even go as far as to click Remembered Kindness and Educated Upbringing. So there'll be this sort of balancing if you're playing in Trade League. If you're playing in Solo Self-Found though, you're much more likely to care about these nodes, and that's what they're there for primarily. However, the small nodes leading to them are fantastic, I think. 10% increased chance for your maps to contain memory tears if those maps are tier 16 or 17. This is really good. I think this is going to give you a lot more access to the new Pinnacle Bosses. So definitely keep this cluster in mind. Even if it turns out that you don't want any of the 3 notables in it, you might want to click all 4 small nodes in there. Now, let's have a look at where the old Shaper and Elder cluster has gone, and it's traveled a very short distance indeed. Remnants of the Past is still the same number of points from the origin, and it still has mostly the same nodes leading up to it. There is one exception, and that is that where you used to have a small node that was 3% pack size for Shaper and Elder maps, you now have 2% increased explicit modifiers on your maps. This is very slightly worse at the start of the league when you're trying to get yourself set up, and you might struggle with increasing the effect of map modifiers on your maps. Once you're solidly at endgame, it's probably better than the old nodes were, but it really is a very small change. As for the right-hand side, this is probably going to be a cluster a lot of people are going to take all 5 nodes in. So you've got a couple of nodes here that are the top 2 that say 10% increased chance for equipment items dropped in your maps to have memory strands. So this means that they'll have the new type of influence for crafting. And down the bottom, you've got 10% increased chance for maps found in your maps to have memory influence. So this is going to be fantastic. This is basically the new tier 16 and a halves. However, Grasp the Past is the huge one here. This notable seems like it's fantastic. 50% chance to roll twice and take the highest when you get memory strands on equipment items. Now this is going to be a 50% more multiplier to your chances of getting the very highest rolls of memory strands that are possible, which we believe is 100, and I'll show you why we believe that to be 100 in a sec. And it's going to be a smaller increase in the percentage chance to get everything that is above an above average roll. For below average rolls, it's going to be a small decrease in your chances to see those, down to approximately a 50% less chance to get the very, very worst roll possible. All in all, Grasp the Past is going to be fantastic. Now, I say this even though I'm pretty negative about the expected impact of memory strand crafting. Recombination provides a better way to get 6 times T1 mods than the new crafting system looks like it's going to do for most crafts, maybe not quite for every single craft. However, despite that, the new memory strand system is still probably going to end up being a lower cost alternative to recombination for certain crafts, and particularly for some very esoteric crafts, this might be the best way to get things done. So that's the Grasp the Past cluster. This is something that I feel is going to be so good that people might end up regarding it as a bit of an Atlas tax. Now let's talk about the other changes. Firstly, there is a cluster here that's been moved, Two-Hearted Hunt. This is an Einhar cluster. It now connects to the center of the Atlas rather than being off somewhere to the side. And this is something that's probably about the same number of points that it otherwise was to get, maybe 1 or 2 more, but those 2 points that you end up spending that are additional, they'll be pretty good ones because of where you are on the tree. Finally, we have this Kalguuran cluster. So Refiner's Bargain, which was mentioned in the recent live stream, also Yield Upon Yield and Fortune's Favor. This cluster is interesting in that it is actually replacing something that Grinding Gear Games had not told us was going away. This is the Choose Your Own Adventure Heist cluster, the one that lets you bias Heist towards getting deception contracts more frequently, or potentially that lets you make a couple of bad choices that do not involve getting more deception contracts. That has been completely removed from the Atlas. That was the second weakest of the Heist clusters, the weakest one being the one for Friends in High Places, but it was still something that people who are running a Heist strategy did tend to take on their Atlas trees. So that one's gone. On the flip side though, Heist is picking up some more power because the Kirac mod for adding Heist to maps has been buffed in this patch. Another thing I want to point out is that we do have numbers now for how substantial all of the biasing towards scarabs is that comes alongside anything that increases the chance to see a blockable mechanic in your maps. So here we have increased ore found and ore deposit chance. This node gives you 5% chance to have ore deposits in your maps, but it also says scarabs dropped in your maps have a 5% increased chance to be Kalguuran scarabs. And another example of this, the Abyss cluster up here, 8% chance to contain an Abyss, but also 8% chance to be Abyss scarabs, 8% biasing of your scarabs towards Abyss. This is interesting. This is going to make certain content actually a little bit worse than it otherwise would be, and that's going to be ones where the scarabs are relatively unpopular. For example, 8% chance to contain an expedition encounter. This is pretty good if you're playing an expedition atlas, but scarabs dropped in your maps have 8% increased bias towards being expedition scarabs is actually probably detrimental in general, especially if you play in Trade League. And that's because most of the expedition strategies that players run don't make much use out of scarabs. And there are definitely ways that you can use those scarabs, but the most common ones don't use scarabs very heavily. The scarab that adds a lot of loot is super rare and also super rippy. And the scarabs that don't add a lot of danger, they're not super high impact. So I expect that there'll be a mixed reception to that change. It's something that seems to be done with the interests of solo self-found players in mind, but that will definitely have a negative impact on Trade League players. So keep that in mind. The change was already announced that it was happening. The numbers on it are now known, and this is going to be something that will be a little bit annoying at times. So let's jump over to the patch notes, and there is exactly one change to the patch notes that's been made today. This is that there has been a fix to a potential duplication exploit that people pointed out. This is the items drop on death if equipped by an animated guardian crafting option. So this is being removed from the crafting bench. The concern people had was what happens if you equip an item to an animated guardian in standard and that item has an existing copy of that mod. Then the animated guardian dies. Does it drop a copy of the item in addition to the animated guardian still surviving, allowing massive duplication of items that have this mod on it? Well, Grinding Gear Games didn't think of this, but someone on Reddit did, and they blew the whistle on it, and Grinding Gear Games were able to fix it before the duplication exploit existed. The final piece of news today is the item filter information. Interestingly, this appears to be missing something that I was expecting to see in it. The patch notes mention added 5 new divination cards. We're not just talking about returning ones, but we're talking about brand new ones. And the Secrets of the Atlas item filter information would normally have provided the names of those divination cards. However, it does not. Now, do you need to pay much attention to the item filter information? The answer is, if your name is NeverSync, absolutely. If you're someone who designs loot filters entirely from the ground up, then yes, this is probably the single most important patch note for you. However, if you are someone who uses someone else's loot filter or who uses a tool like Filterblade in order to customize your loot filter a little bit, then this is not going to be super important. There is still some information of note in here, and that is what items are going to exist in 3.26. So let's go through that. Firstly, we have this section on new keywords, Zana memory and memory strands. The key thing here that we pick up is that the values of memory strands are capped above at 100. So that's information that's now confirmed. Updated keywords. This is not very important for most people. Just transfigured gem is true, is false. This might, however, be useful in the context of doing searches on the trade site. So keep that one in mind as a potential. New items though, this one's a little bit more interesting. Here we have the section on stackable currency, and here we've got Veiled Chaos Orb and Shaper's Exalted Orb, Elder's Exalted Orb, Orb of Remembrance, Unraveling, and Intention. These were all announced. This is confirmation that there's no more of them. And then we have the Runegrafts. So we have the Runegraft of the Angler. I could tell you what that does, but then I would be muted for disclosing fishing secrets. After that, there is the Bound, the Combatant, the Fortress, the Jeweler, the Novamark, the Rider, the Sinistral, the Solwick, the Warp, the Witchmark, Bellows, Blasphemy, Gemcraft, Loyalty, Quaffing, Recompense, Restitching, Stability, Time, and Treachery. We could take some guesses as to what these individually do, but they would just be guesses. All we know is that these are going to be the new tattoos that apply to masteries, and the source of getting them is going to be by sending things to Kalguuran ports. After that, we have map fragments. Classic Kalguuran Scarab plus a Guarded Riches and Refinement version. These have been teased already. Echo of Trauma, Reverence, and Loneliness. These are almost certainly going to be the Pinnacle Boss access keys for the new Pinnacle Bosses. Syndicate Medallion is the access key for Katarina. And then we have the Allflame members. The thing to note here is that there's not very many of them, and we do have something like the old Frog Allflame member. So those of you that have played around with Frog Allflames in the past will probably be able to do so again. It does not appear that there is anything like the old Allflame Ember for Sulfite monsters, so that appears to be gone. That was something that transformed the economy for Delvers. Basically took away almost all the loot that Delvers were getting because you would get it faster by using the Allflame Ember in question. That's not there. That was something that existed in Necropolis League but has not come back. And then item class gems, very, very few of these. Heavy Strike of Trarthan, Spectral Shield Throw of Trarthan. We've seen the stats of Heavy Strike of Trarthan already. We've seen gameplay footage of Spectral Shield Throw of Trarthan. Stormcall of Trarthan was teased in the reveal. Blast Rain of Trarthan, Siege Ballista of Trarthan, Sunder of Trarthan could be interesting. Wave of Conviction of Trarthan did not sell me when the numbers on it were revealed, and also some gameplay footage. Chain Hook of Trarthan sounds like it could be fun, but probably not very good. Spectral Helix of Trarthan, I hate Spectral Helix. Maybe you might like it more than I do. Hopefully you do. And Bladefall of Trarthan is also coming, but there's not very many of these, and that's something that I found quite interesting. In returning items, we have a number of Divination cards. The details of these are all detailed in the patch notes. These are things that used to drop in the past. They exist in Standard, but the item that they turned in for was in some way bricked. So for instance, there's the ones for Parandus Mana. They are coming back. All the details of that in the patch notes if you're interested in checking them out. Renamed items also contains a little bit of hidden information here, and that is what the Pantheon Souls are. If you're interested in finding out all of that so that you can plan that out, there is a list of all of the maps that are on the Atlas, and that's going to come up in a sec. Removed items, nothing that surprises us here. It's all the memory lines and also all of the runes that were existing solely in the Settlers expansion. And then we have the map tiers. This is really useful to have a flick through when you're planning your league start strategies. And something I think is very important to keep in mind is that each Void Stone that you apply, the first Void Stone adds 3 to the tier of every map. Every subsequent Void Stone that you apply to your Atlas adds 4. So that can help you then work out what your strategies are going to be. We don't necessarily know Divination cards for all the maps because they will get shuffled around and in ways that we don't know. We're going to find that information out when the patch goes live, unless Grinding Gear Games come out with a full list of it beforehand. For some funny reason though, Strand is tier 3 again. Strand seems to love being tier 3. Partly that's because it does have a unique map attached to it, and there's not very many places unique maps can go on the current Atlas, so that means that one of those unique maps has to be in that tier 3 spot, but Strand has been tier 3 for a very, very long time. Atoll is tier 5 again. If that is still the place that the Spark and the Flame Divination card drops in the next league, then that's worth keeping in mind because that is a Divination card that's very relevant, both as one option, one way of building some of the Ignite Proliferation / Righteous Fire Chieftains, but also it is a key component to the taming. It's probably the most sought after tier 3 rarity drop anywhere unique, and the Divination card for it comes from Atoll, or at least it comes from Atoll in the current patch. Otherwise, the most important thing here is what the natural tier 16s are: Tower, Canyon, Crimson Township, and Lighthouse. This is an above average set of maps, but it's not a flawless set, and there are some good tier 15 maps associated as well. Anyway, that's the information that we've got at the moment, and then after that, there's some clarification that 2020 skill gems are coming soon, and on top of that, Sanctum nerfs. Sanctum nerfs will be detailed tomorrow, most likely. And that's the entirety of the teasers for today. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results,